Sarah Kay, and I'm the founder of the Professional Organization for Women in the Arts. And it's my pleasure to welcome Nancy Rosoff, who is the Curator of Arts in the Americas at the Brooklyn Museum, and he'll be giving us a tour of her exhibition, Climate and Crisis. I'll just mention before I say a few words about POW Arts that this exhibition is one that I had seen, I don't know, maybe in the winter, I guess. And I was really taken by it. And I was so pleased, Nancy, that you agreed to give this tour, because I think for people, especially that are not able to come to Brooklyn and see the exhibition, it's a really important one for people to know about and have this tour of. So before I have the pleasure of introducing Nancy, I just ask that you leave your questions, your comments in the chat box, or we can use the Q&A feature at the end of Nancy's presentation. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes after our presentation, and we can take your questions then. Very shortly, we're going to be releasing the second results from our COVID impact survey. So thank you to anyone who participated in that survey. And along with the results of the survey, we're also going to be releasing our summer programming, which is all going to be focused on employment, various issues related to employment, and some fun networking events as well. So look out for that announcement, which should come probably at the end of this week. And finally, during these challenging times, we have opened up our membership and our programs to everyone for free, and we're very happy to do it. And we'd also love your support. So if you can give a donation or join as a member, we'd love to have you. Now, Nancy, it's my great pleasure to introduce you. You are the Andrew W. Mellon Senior Curator of Arts of the Americas at Brooklyn Museum. Appointed in 2001, Nancy is responsible for the museum's pre-Columbian and Native American art collections, consisting of approximately 35,000 objects from North, Central, and South America. Among her many projects, she curated collection reinstallations in 2004 and 2013, and co-curated Sila Vicuña Quipo Desparecido in 2018, and Tipi, Heritage of the Great Plains in 2011. She also curated the pre-Columbian and Spanish Americas objects in Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving in 2019. Her most recent exhibition, Climate and Crisis, Environmental Change in the Indigenous Americas, is the subject of this talk. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me for this virtual tour of Climate and Crisis, Environmental Change in the Indigenous Americas. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Brooklyn Museum and the location of my home stand on land that is part of the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware people. Honor the Lenape Delaware nations, their elders past and present, and future generations. At the Brooklyn Museum, we are committed to addressing exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples and confronting the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism in our work. So this evening, I'm going to be taking you through the exhibition and highlighting the role of several Indigenous women in the fight for environmental justice. I will also be giving you a preview of new works that will be rotated into the galleries in June. As standard museum practice, we rotate light-sensitive works every 6 to 12 months, depending upon the object. And as an example, we rotate works on paper every 6 months. Climate and Crisis, which opened in February 2020, and has been extended through July 2022, presents the collection of Indigenous art from North, Central, and South America through the lens of climate change and its impact on the survival of Indigenous people. In 2019, the relentless news about the raging, deliberately set forest fires in Brazil, the impact of global warming on Arctic sea ice, and the Trump administration's assault on Native American sovereignty and ancestral homelands provided the urgency for developing the exhibition. The show was organized in 5 months with a modest budget, which meant that the appropriate Native American consultations were not possible. However, we compensated for this deficiency by including published statements by Indigenous community activists, which you will see at the top of the slides. I also interviewed the living artists featured in the show to get their perspectives on the climate crisis for inclusion in object labels. The main thesis of the exhibition is that the current climate emergency is part of a longer history of environmental colonialism that began 100 years ago. For millennia, Indigenous communities throughout the Americas have maintained profound and expansive relationships with the natural world. However, beginning in the 1500s, Europe's conquest and colonization of the Americas forced ways of using natural resources that clashed with traditional Indigenous modes of relating to the natural world. This fundamental difference in worldview between one that sees human beings, animals, plants, and the land as interrelated and co-equal, and another that privileges human needs above everything else has resulted in ever-escalating threats to Indigenous homelands, ways of life, and survival, as well as the unprecedented level of climate change affecting the planet today. Climate in Crisis uses the museum's world-renowned holdings of Indigenous art from ancient times to the present as an entryway for understanding Indigenous knowledge systems and their centrality in the creation of environmental justice. The works on view connect to the environment in one of two ways. Many reveal Indigenous understandings of the world as they relate to natural resources, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs, while others more directly address the threat of climate change to Indigenous livelihoods. The central concept of environmental colonialism refers to the cumulative impact of land seizures, forced relocations, government and corporate development projects, and accelerated natural resource extraction on Indigenous peoples. This history is manifested today not only in environmental problems such as wildfires, droughts, floods, glacial melt, and resource scarcity, but also in societal problems such as starvation, public health emergencies, military conflicts, refugee crises, and violence waged against Indigenous communities and activists. The exhibition is divided into 7 regional groupings and countries spanning North, Central, and South America, an organizational framework that is complicated because it disregards the spread of myriad cultures across the continents before nation states with political borders even existed. However, by grouping the works by country, the exhibition underscores the geopolitical nature of any attempt to combat the climate crisis today. Each regional section provides a history of Indigenous occupation and spotlights a current environmental problem and how Indigenous activists are resisting and counteracting this problem. A map included to help visitors locate the region's ancient cultures and present-day communities is juxtaposed with an ancient Maya tetrapod or four-legged vessel, which conveys a very different form of mapping, one that unifies the natural, spiritual, and ancestral realms. The vessel illustrates the 3 levels of the Maya universe: the celestial overworld of ancestors and supernatural beings, the earthly middle world of human and animal life, and the watery underworld of the dead. These realms are indicated by way of a bird that has the ability to float on the earth's waters and fly in the sky. The mottled legs representing peccaries are associated with the pillars supporting the 4 directions of the cosmos. The exhibition opens with 2 introductory objects that spotlight 2 devastating environmental issues and illustrate the exhibition's format. A beaded model teepee by Kiowa artist Terry Greaves is displayed in conversation with photographs of the 2016 protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, or DAPL, in North Dakota. The pipeline, which crosses under Lake Oahe, just upstream of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, started operation in 2017 and was originally slated to cross the Missouri River near Bismarck, but was moved out of fear that an oil spill would contaminate the state capital's drinking water. Despite numerous lawsuits and protests, many of which culminated in violence toward protesters, The pipeline was completed after President Trump issued an executive order in January 2017. The pipeline, which handles 570,000 barrels a day, is a direct threat to the tribe's drinking water and sovereignty. A recent court order was unsuccessful in halting operations, and the pipeline continues to carry crude oil while litigation continues. The model teepee with beaded images of contemporary Kiowa life reaffirms the sacredness of the land for Native people. Greaves references the teepees erected at the water protectors Ochidis Shakowee camp in the following statement. My teepee is about a Kiowa way of life passed down through the generations. The teepee as idea represents the home and the heart of family, community, and tribal nation. In staking down a teepee, a way of life is staked down, and the sacred space is created and held. This is what those water protectors were doing. They were creating and holding sacred space with their teepees in a place that is once again under threat from the United States. A little closer to home in Minnesota, the Anishinaabe are fighting the Canadian oil company Enbridge over construction of a new 1,000-mile line-free pipeline that will carry 760,000 barrels of tar sands oil a day from Edmonton, Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin. The pipeline, which is scheduled to be completed by the end of the year, will replace the original Line 3, which was built in the 1960s and is now corroded, cracked, and leaking so badly that its carrying capacity has been cut in half. However, the new pipeline does not follow the same route, but runs through untouched lands, waters, and wetlands of wild rice, which is a traditional food of the Anishinaabe people. Crossing under 200 bodies of water, the pipeline violates Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights and poses an existential threat to the survival of Anishinaabe communities who depend upon the rivers and lakes for clean drinking water and fishing. Information about this pipeline is not included in the exhibition, but I learned about it recently when the organization Extinction Rebellion asked the Brooklyn Museum to host an outdoor screening of the 2020 documentary Necessity, Oil, Water, and Climate Resistance. The film documents the Indigenous-led struggle to protect ancestral homelands in Minnesota and the critical role of Anishinaabe women such as Tanya Abid, who went on a hunger strike for over 20 days in protest of the pipeline. Other activists in the struggle for environmental justice include Winona LaDuke, who's pictured on the left, and Taisha Martineau on the right. LaDuke, who is the more well-known of the three because she was Ralph Nader's running mate during his Green Party presidential candidacy in 1996 and 2000, is a Native American activist, economist, and author. She has devoted her life to advocating for Indigenous control of homelands, natural resources, and cultural practices. And she is currently the program director of Honor the Earth, a Native environmental advocacy organization that played an active role in the DAPL protests. Martineau is an Indigenous organizer and co-founder of Camp Migizi and the Gitchagumi Scouts, two organizations that are dedicated to locating missing and murdered Indigenous women. Native women are particularly vulnerable when extractive industry projects such as the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline establish camps of transient male workers near their communities. The second introductory object is a mid-20th century Tembe girl's initiation feathered headdress, which is shown adjacent to photographs from 2019 of the Amazon forest burning and a Tembe community meeting in the Alto Rio Gama Indigenous Reserve in the state of Para in northeastern Brazil. The reserve of 1,080 square miles is supposed to be protected from outside exploitation, but has been overrun by illegal loggers who are cutting down trees and setting fires to clear land for commercial farming, livestock grazing, and mining. The Tembe community members have been forced to patrol their territory with bows, arrows, and video cameras to document the destruction. In the main exhibition gallery, groups of objects spanning approximately 2,500 years reveal Indigenous understandings of the world as it relates to local natural resources, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. Inuit, Yupik, and Alaskan Native objects dating from the late 19th century and 20th century in the Canadian and US Arctic section include an engraved sperm whale tooth, mask, and print that reflect the continued importance of hunting in the Arctic region and the interrelationship between animal and spirit worlds. The engraved whale tooth on the right depicts images of hunting, fishing, and community life. The Yupik dance mask on the left represents a valley ptarmigan, a bird native to Alaska that was hunted for food. The mask was worn during winter ceremonies to honor the Yuit, or inner persons of animals, and the dances were a form of prayer in which animal spirits were asked to give their physical bodies to meet the needs of the community. The large, colorful print by Inuit artist Kanojuak Ashavat, which will be put on display in June, depicts the sun as an animate female being whose arrival after the long, dark Arctic winter heralds a time of plenty for both animals and humans. Birds shown emanating from the sun's rays migrate to the far north during the summer season to feast on abundant fish and insects. Kanojuak, who knew the Arctic environment well, celebrates the life-giving force of the sun for all living creatures in this joyful work. In the 1700s, the introduction of commercial whaling by Dutch, Scottish, French, and US crews severely impacted the Arctic ecosystem, followed just decades later by unsustainable hunting of caribou, muskox, walrus, and other animals. Today, Arctic temperatures are rising twice as fast as the global average, and in the past 3 decades alone, multi-year ice has declined by 95%, shifting animals' migration patterns, devastating the region's biodiversity, and creating dangerous conditions that threaten the very existence of the ice and those who live on it. In the Canadian and US Northwest Coast section, 19th century cedar wood carvings of elaborate dance masks and houseposts from the Kwakiwak and Heiltsuk nations of British Columbia reference animal ancestors and the clan system, which is based upon the special relationship between animals and humans since time immemorial. For example, the carved housepost on the left depicts the creation story of the Heiltsuk Eagle clan and its ancestral homeland of Yalatli, or Goose Island. The story goes that in the beginning of time, many of the world's inhabitants were animals and supernatural creatures. Some could take off their fur and feathers and assume human form, while others always remained in their supernatural presence. One day, a supernatural eagle with a human face and a bird's beak saw a whale in the water and tried to seize it for food. After a mighty struggle, the eagle flipped the whale over and began to devour it, spilling the whale's intestines into the water where they piled up to form Yalatli. The eagle decided to live on the island, becoming human and adopting the name Wikvilba Wakas, or eagle nose, which has been passed down through the generations and is today held by Chief Harvey Humchit. The movable Thunderbird transformation mask on the top right, which is also shown closed below, depicts a supernatural ancestor of the Namgis clan of the Kwakiwak people, who say that when he ruffles his feathers, thunder claps, and when he blinks his eyes, lightning flashes. The story goes that when Thunderbird flew out of the heavens to assist a man who had been transformed into a halibut, the supernatural being removed his headdress and winged cape and became human. During winter potlatch ceremonies, the wearer of this mask would open and shut its beak to reveal the human figures within. The painted double-headed serpent is Sistiudel, who is a protector spirit. The contemporary glass sculpture by Tlingit artist Preston Singletary depicts a killer whale, which is the hereditary crest figure of his clan. Singletary writes, corporations and even our current government are rolling back environmental regulations, defunding scientific research, building oil pipelines which endanger our clean water, and a whole host of other issues that endanger our health as a nation. In my opinion, this is due to the lack of a true spiritual connection in relation to nature. It is driven by a blind and misguided capitalist perspective that is not balanced by respect for our environment. The Northwest Coast region has been overexploited by non-native people for fishing, logging, mining, and agriculture since the early 19th century. Today, rapid environmental degradation continues as a result of population growth, pollution, adverse land management policies, industrial scale logging, and climate change, irreversibly impacting the natural resources of the region. Salmon, a cornerstone of many tribes' cultural and economic sustainability, has experienced a significant decline, which threatens treaty rights, tribal rights, and the integrity of the ecosystem. The U.S. Southwest grouping of late 19th and 20th century Hopi and Zuni Kachina dolls emphasizes how these two tribes are part of a continuum of ancestral Pueblo life that has existed in the Four Corners region of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah for thousands of years. In the southwestern United States, a supernatural being that represents a life force or embodies a natural phenomenon such as the sun, the moon, a plant, or an animal is called Koko by the Zuni and Katsina, commonly anglicized as Kachina by the Hopi. Such beings have the power to control rainfall, crop growth, and fertility, to cure and protect, and to act as messengers between the gods and human beings. Carved Kachina figures, also known as Kachina dolls, are representations of these spirits and can have a sacred or educational purpose. During some ceremonies, the carvings are given to community members to award virtuous behavior, recognize a recent marriage, or teach children about the religion. In the late 1800s, a lively market for the carvings developed among non-native collectors and tourists, giving rise to the elaborate art form that flourishes today. The Hopi and Zuni are among several Native American tribes who identify the Bears Ears region in Utah as an integral part of their ancestral homelands. The Trump administration reduced the Bears Ears National Monument, which was established by President Barack Obama in 2016, by 85% in order to permit uranium mining and gas and oil drilling. The Biden administration is now reviewing Trump's executive order, and new Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary, is meeting with tribal leaders and other stakeholders in order to advise the president on how to proceed. Hopefully, the Biden administration will restore the original boundaries of the Bears Ears National Monument. In the U.S. Mississippi River Valley section, an engraved conch shell cup depicting a falcon warrior is displayed as an example of pre-contact climate change, when a little ice age brought cooler temperatures and extreme weather to the Mississippi River Valley. The Spiral Mounds archaeological site in present-day eastern Oklahoma was the western outpost of a series of prosperous cultures referred to as Mississippian that developed in the riverine regions of the Midwest and Southeast between 900 and 1650. In one of Spiro's mounds, a hollow chamber was found containing thousands of ceremonial objects, including this cup, which had been brought there from all over the Mississippian world. The chamber and most of the offerings date to around 1400, when the Little Ice Age was causing disturbing environmental changes, and suggests an attempt through ritual to summon a new age of stability and abundance. More recently, in 2016, the Isle de Jean Charles Band of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe along the Mississippi Delta became the first Native community to receive federal funding to support its resettlement as a result of climate change. A combination of rising sea levels, land subsidence, and oil and gas development has forced the community from its homeland and required that its members adapt their ways of life to a new region. Chantal Camardel, Tribal Executive Secretary of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw Tribe, has been very involved in resettlement efforts as well as in the preservation of the tribe's ancestral homeland and cultural traditions. The multimedia work by Chitimacha Choctaw artist Sarah Sense on the right, which is rotating into this section in June, references her family's history in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Germany, and Ireland. Entitled Remember 5 because it is the fifth work in the Remember series, Sense literally weaves together her Chitimacha, Choctaw, and German heritage, as well as her personal connection to Ireland through her marriage and the birth of her first child there. The photographs of the German city of Krefeld in the 1920s and waterfalls in Germany's Black Forest and Connemara, Ireland, are cut into strips like the river cane used to weave Chitimacha baskets in Louisiana and are woven together in traditional basket patterns. Sense's work refers to the complexity of Native American identity today and its connection to place, both physical and spiritual. In her artist statement, she wrote, drawing inspiration from archival and photographic research, these photo weavings explore the vast colonial history in Native North America, the English colonizing of Ireland, and family histories of immigration. Research into stories of contact, exploration, war, and their effects on contemporary Native life and the environment bring into question colonization's role in climate change. Physically combining images by weaving ancestral basket patterns into archival documents and photographs reclaim space and Native perspectives, telling visual stories of Indigenous peoples while staying grounded in Chitimacha and Choctaw basket weaving techniques. The German archives, combined with my landscape photography, brings relevance to past-present narratives, conceptually closing a gap between historical and contemporary time. This unique rhythm spins a historical web, entangling realities of war and genocide while honoring ancestral basket weaving. In the Mexico and Guatemala section, ancient objects dating from 1200 BCE to the Spanish conquest in 1521 include works by Olmec, Maya, Aztec, and Huastec cultures. These works testify to the diversity of artistic expression in the region and demonstrate a close interplay between the spiritual and natural worlds. The museum's iconic Huastec life desk sculpture, shown on the left, of a male figure carrying a human skeleton on his back, epitomizes this interplay. The primary figure is the Aztec wind god, Quetzalcoatl, who created humankind and is identifiable by his J-shaped ear pendants. The skeletal figure with a protruding heart represents death and wears a collar and a skirt decorated with semicircular motifs that are associated with the sun and the planet Venus. Venus, the morning star, was another important Aztec god, thought to pull the sun across the sky and down into the underworld. Densely patterned designs on the primary figure's arms and legs include ears of corn, which, like the other imagery, are symbolically related to agriculture, fertility, life, and death. The use of animal imagery to support divine rule and convey military strength was common among the ancient Maya, whose classic period dated from 250 to 900 in a region that encompasses modern-day Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and portions of southern Mexico. The ceramic vessel in the center features a procession of 11 military victors following a naked bound prisoner. Each warrior wears a tie-dyed textile, a trophy head suspended from his belt, and an animal headdress that may represent his warrior society. The reclining jaguar on the right is an excellent example of Aztec naturalistic sculpture. The Aztec Empire was centered in the Valley of Mexico and thrived from 1345 until the Spanish conquest in 1521. On the sculpture, every part of the animal is carefully rendered, including the underside, where the paw pads are carved in low relief. To the Aztecs, the jaguar symbolized power, courage, and a warlike attitude. Some of the highest-ranking warriors were called jaguar warriors, and rulers associated themselves with Tezcatlipoca, a deity who sometimes assumed the guise of this powerful predator. In the 500 years since Spain's deadly conquest and occupation of indigenous lands, the region's climate and ecosystems have experienced significant changes that have destabilized and displaced native populations. Today, indigenous activists in areas such as Mexico's Sierra Madre are advocating for environmental reform and indigenous land rights in an attempt to overcome the violent actions against people and the environment perpetrated by logging and mining profiteers. Zia Bastida, who we quote in the exhibition, is an Atomi Toltec climate justice activist and lead organizer of Fridays for the Future, a global climate strike movement that started in August 2018 when the teenage Swedish activist Greta Thunberg began a school strike for climate. Bastida, who is now 19 years old, was born in Mexico to parents who are also environmentalists. She moved to New York City with her family in 2015 after extreme flooding hit their hometown of San Pedro Chapultepec, following 3 years of drought. Now a student at the University of Pennsylvania, Bastida contributed to All We Can Save, an anthology of women writing about climate change, and she recently spoke at the Leadership Summit on Climate hosted by the Biden administration, delivering a speech urging world leaders to participate more in climate activism. In the Central Americas section, ancient objects from present-day Costa Rica, Panama, and Colombia, which Colombia is in northern South America, but it's part of that artistic complex, dating between 700 and 1550, represent different cultures, but they all share a common belief in the connection between the natural and spiritual worlds. Representations of rulers, warriors, shamans, and supernatural beings incorporate attributes of animals that were revered for their strength and other natural abilities. For example, the carved stone warrior figure from Costa Rica on the left wears a fearsome crocodile mask, which an actual warrior may have done in the hope of ascribing the power of that creature to himself. The figure carries a severed human head representing a decapitated enemy. The taking and displaying of trophy heads was a common practice in ancient Costa Rica. Represented as androgynous, the figure has pronounced breasts, a penis, and testicles. The right arm is missing, but appears to have been flexed upward, probably to hold an axe. The hat, mask, ear spools, and shoulder band are covered with incised geometrical designs. Also from Costa Rica, the pear-shaped, elaborately painted effigy vessel in the center of this slide depicts the jaguar as a fearsome and powerful predator. The blood-stained open mouth, pronounced incisors, and crouching stance convey that this is an intimidating species to be respected. The black and white pattern areas made up of stylized jaguar heads imitate the animal's coat, and the anthropomorphic pose with hands on knees is standard in Costa Rican depictions of shamans who have the power to transform themselves into animals and move between natural and supernatural realms. Certain qualities of the materials also reinforce this connection to the natural world, whether it is the hardness of volcanic stone or the lustrous appearance of gold, which is associated with the sun and native cosmologies. The circular gold plaque on the upper right from Sitio Cante, Panama, depicts the crocodile god, who was likely associated with strength, the sun, water, and fertility. The ruling elite probably wore prestige ornaments such as this to appropriate the power of crocodiles, fierce animals connected to the underworld for their ability to float on water and drag their prey underneath to drown it. On this plaque, the crocodilian being may be a creator god or a transformative image of the wearer. Smaller crocodiles surround the central figure, and the triangular border design simulates the animal's protective ridge-like scales. The figure on the Tirona gold pendant from Colombia on the lower right may represent a shaman wearing an elaborate headdress that includes depictions of two diving bats. Bats, efficient hunters that sometimes feed on the blood of other animals, were associated with night and the underworld. By wearing such an ornament, a shaman would have taken on the strength, agility, and night vision of the bat so that he could travel through the cosmos and acquire knowledge inaccessible to other members of the community. Angelica Ortiz, a Wayuu human rights activist and General Secretary of the Fuerza de Mujeres Wayuu, has been leading protests against El Cerrejón, the largest open pit coal mine in Latin America. Located in the department of La Guajira near the Venezuelan border, El Cerrejón has been operating since the 1980s and uses more than 4.2 million gallons of water a day from the Rancheria River, the Wayuu's main source of water. Excuse me. The mine is not only taxing a desert region already suffering from droughts, but coal dust pollution is contaminating the environment, making subsistence farming impossible. As the mine continues to expand, Indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities are being forcefully displaced without resettlement plans. As a consequence, these mine refugees are exposed to violence, largely at the hands of paramilitary groups and criminal organizations, who are also harassing and targeting environmental activists like Ortiz. Just in this year alone, 41 Indigenous activists have been assassinated. Ortiz is now forced to live apart from her children in order to protect them because she will not stop her anti-mining activism. The exhibition also discusses the impact of climate change on migration, which is increasingly being recognized as a significant factor in human displacement. As the climate crisis intensifies, migration is escalating across the globe, and it is estimated that by the year 2050, 200 million climate refugees will have left their homelands in search of new places to live. Encompassing Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the northern triangle of Central America is one of the regions most vulnerable to climate change. In recent years, floods along the coastlines and droughts in the highlands have multiplied, affecting rural communities and their economies and forcing millions of people to immigrate. The flood of Honduran refugees at the US border is a result of 2 hurricanes last year that buried their communities, homes, and farmlands in mud. And in a New York Times article published just this past Friday stated that in 2020, storms, floods, and wildfires had uprooted 40.5 million people around the world. In the Peru section, ancient polychrome ceramics and gold ornaments from the south coast and dating between 300 BCE and 440 CE reference the importance of agriculture in one of the driest regions of the world, with numerous depictions of supernatural fertility beings decorated with undulating snakes and agricultural plants. For example, the Paracas funerary mask on the left represents the opulent being, named for its large round eyes, which may have been an early fertility cultural deity. The mask, which would have been attached to a mummy bundle, has a long projecting nose and 4 undulating serpents are painted across the face, each with 2 heads that form projecting tabs. The 3 tabs below the smiling toothy mouth may represent a tongue and possibly fangs. Snakes are also visible on the Nazca hammered gold mouth mask, which was worn suspended from the septum of the nose, with the circular void for the wearer's mouth and stylized whiskers in the form of serpents. For the Nazca, gold and snake imagery had religious meaning. Gold was associated with sun cults and rulers who wore elaborate masks such as this one and were regarded as living representatives of the gods. Snake imagery on both Paracas and Nazca objects is linked to fertility and water cults. These elements come together on the double spout bridge handle vessel on the right. Painted with an anthropomorphic mythical being who also wears a gold mouth mask, the figure is interpreted by scholars as a symbolic representation of the powerful spirits residing in nature. On this vessel, the being is associated with agricultural fertility, as indicated by the many multicolored peppers depicted on its body. The figure holds 2 trophy heads in one hand and a club and some peppers in the other. Decapitation and the shedding of blood were associated with cultivation and the regeneration of plants. In the ecologically diverse country of Peru, the effects of climate change manifest themselves in myriad interconnected ways. For example, melting glaciers in the high Andes not only affect rainfall, but also lead to an increase in floods and landslides toward the coast. This complex situation is exacerbated by companies' attempts to seize land from farmers and herders for the purpose of oil and gas extraction, gold mining, and illegal logging. In the indigenous Quechua language, the word pacha encompasses interrelated ideas of space, place, time, and the universe, a worldview that continues to inform much indigenous activism and advocacy in environmental stewardship. The Amazonian section features 20th century objects from Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador, and illustrates how tribes utilize tropical forest resources to produce exquisite ornaments, such as the dazzling feathered headband on the right, which is rotating into the exhibition in June. Made by a Shuar or Achuar man from the mountainous tropical regions of southeastern Ecuador and northern Peru, red and yellow toucan feathers are accentuated by a narrow band of black and radiant blue cotinga feathers. These striking headdresses are worn for special occasions by older men and political leaders as symbols of their authority. Today, Shuar and Achuar leaders are fighting to ban large-scale mining in their territories. The earrings in the center are made of iridescent green beetle wing covers and were collected in Pongo de Manseriche on the Maranon River in the 1930s. The indigenous people who live in this region are the Aguaruna, linguistically related to the Shuar and Achuar of Ecuador. When the earrings were collected, the area was still part of Ecuador, but after the signing of the Rio Protocol of 1942, which officially ended the Ecuadorian-Peruvian War, some 80,000 square miles of previously disputed Amazon territory were awarded to Peru. Military conflict between the two countries continued until 1995, when a definitive peace treaty was signed. This history illustrates how Indigenous people whose ancestral homelands overlap multiple nation states are affected by political conflicts. Karaja ceramic figurines, such as the one on the left of a man and turtle in a canoe, are made exclusively by women. Originally used as cultural teaching tools for girls, the figurines are now made for sale to tourists. The Karaja live in 29 villages along the shores of the Araguaia River in central Brazil, including on the world's largest riverine island, the Ilha do Bananal. Canoes are used to travel along the rivers that are the lifeblood of the Karaja tribe and are thus essential to its way of life. However, river ecosystems in Brazil and elsewhere are threatened today by dams, mining, deforestation, overfishing, and pollution from commercial agriculture. And finally, we wanted to end the exhibition on a positive note, so a Take Action panel provides visitors with a variety of suggestions as to how they can make a difference, from recycling at home to supporting environmental justice organizations. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can take questions. In a minute. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are.
Great.
Thank you, Nancy. That was such a great supplement to seeing the exhibition in person. I don't see any questions yet, so I have two I'd like to ask while we get some other questions in. I'm curious to know if the activists that participated in the written statements, because there were many written statements by different activists, including the panel text. I think it was as we exited the exhibition. I'm wondering if these activists were individuals that you're already in touch with and have ongoing relationships with, because I mean, clearly your knowledge of climate crisis is significant as well. And so I'm just wondering if this came about because of the exhibition and organized quickly and you made all these contacts, or this is something that's been a conversation for a period of time.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Some of the activists we were actually able to contact. Gia Bastida, for example, participated in a public program at the museum. Others we were not able to contact due to distance or not knowing how to reach them. Again, as a model, it's always better to give yourself ample time, maybe years in advance, to establish collaborative and relationships and partnerships with Indigenous people that you're going to represent in an exhibition. So there were a lot of compromises in developing this exhibition quickly, but it was really important that we included as many Native voices as possible, which is also why reaching out to the contemporary artists and having them respond was important.
For sure. My second question was about the collection. About this particular area. I come from a different, I'm really a modernist person. So, when I'm looking with what you sent me, 35,000 objects in the collection. Sorry.
That's my dog in the background too, sort of making some rumbling. So the challenges of working from home.
My apologies for that. That was a crazy little thing that happened. A woman just entered my apartment. I actually live in a townhouse and my dog is very good at her job at protecting. So sorry for that. My question is about the collection. 35,000 objects seems huge to me. And I'm wondering, is that normal for a museum institution? You know, sort of how does that compare to other institutions in terms of the collection, and just a little bit about the history would be really great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question. I mean, the Brooklyn Museum has a long history. It was actually established in 1823 as a library. It hired its first curator of ethnology in 1903. And it was at that time when institutions were practicing salvage anthropology and going out in the field, because Native American tribes were, the view was Native American tribes were dying out and they had to collect as much as possible. So the Brooklyn Museum really began actively collecting in the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, at a time where this was the mandate. Institutions were to collect as much as possible because they had the mandate to educate all the new immigrants that were coming to the country. And of course, New York was the capital of the United States. Brooklyn itself was sort of the heart of New York City and industry. So it's that lengthy history that really created the foundation of all of these collections. They're vast holdings, and there's no way. Usually, institutions can only display 10% of their collections at any one time. So it's a real challenge, and there's also collections that are not exhibition quality, that are exhibition quality. There are objects that are good at telling your story and not. So there's a lot that goes into sort of deciding what objects you put on view from a collection and, what you don't use.
I think I saw a hand go up and go down. I think it was Lori. So I'm going to just unmute her and see if she had a question. If not, we'll continue on. Lori, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Maybe not. So my final question is there any programming that's coming up around this? First of all, I'm so glad that this show was extended. I know that when we talked to you, it just extended, and I think that's great because it's so important that people see it. So is there any programming or other ways to?
I'm sure there will be. I mean, we're focused on, Slipstream just opened. We have all these new shows. We have cause that are up. We have a lot of new exhibitions that are up now. And so a lot of the programming is geared toward that. But people should just stay tuned, look on the museum's website, on the calendar. And I can even, Sarah, reach out to you if there are any special programs related to this exhibition. I'm sure there will be.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm shocked that there are no questions in the chat, or I'm just double checking.
Yeah, because when I've done this before, there are usually always so many questions, but well, good. I mean, very smart crowd.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for being here for the presentation. If people that are here, if you haven't seen the exhibition, I really encourage you to go if you can. It was so worthwhile. I'm planning to go back again. So yeah. Thank you for being here, Nancy, and hope to see everyone again soon.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great night. Bye-bye.
Bye.